Okay, it's the 23rd of September. This is the Sociology of Popular Culture, music and political context. Beatles, India, Exotica, civil rights, anti-war movement, and the 1960s. All right. So I'd like you to keep your cameras on, unless you have speed issues like me. And I will take up a census. You can interrupt me at any time, ask a question, and so on. And I'm going to show some clips today, some music. Beatles, talk about Orientalism and exoticism, some discussion. The context for me thinking about this is still the work of Theodore Adorno, thinking about the culture industry, modification and all of that. Huang, no problem. Culture industry, Adorno and Horkheimer in their book, Dialectic of Enlightenment, talked about how culture now impresses the same stamp on everything. Adorno elaborated on this to say that there's a standardization in culture where even the claim of each thing to be unique is itself the same claim. Think about how every kind of phone says that it's unique, but they're all pretty much the same. They all do the same things, right? And you'll see whenever someone introduces something that's unique into the phone technology, within a year or so, every other phone can do the same thing, right? So the same stamp is being placed on the commodities of culture. And unfortunately, some people, especially older people, when they start to complain about the music industry, they say, oh, all the songs are the same now. It's like they're things were the old days. You know? I kind of want to show you stuff about the Beatles to show that they were working model of a hit that they had learned from the repetition of the culture industry, from American music and from popular musics in England, and they found a formula and introduced new quirks. I mean, that's a huge, big debate. So, but there's a sense in which Adorno is still spot on in regard to that. Even when I was growing up, I know that's many thousands of years ago, it was almost inescapable that John, Paul, George and Ringo and Stu, the fifth Beatle, were unavoidable. Now, at the same time, the Rolling Stones were the alternative, and I listen to them more, but the Beatles are still there. And there was this TV show every morning. The Beatles were there when you woke up. They were like, and this, I was in Australia, right? They were an international phenomenon. And they had a formula for this show. It was like so many. Each show half an hour long, had two sections. There was a sing-along section where lyrics were on the screens. Participation, and it presented pop culture, often for kids. Like get them early, get them young, and draw them into that. I want to show you some of the footage from then. Unfortunately, I have to go into my history now because, tomorrow never knows. Here we go. what to say about the Beatles. Where to start even? The Beatles started off with these little pop songs. They were like Please Please Me or Help or so on. They were very conventional. I kind of want to skip some of that and get into their more exotic stuff where they tried to be more unique and where they tried to do...
My job is to make college...
Get out of it. Tried to do more experimental things. Okay? So things like Strawberry Fields. Let's see if I can play some of these actually. I don't know whether I can. It's slow internet today. Presenting there. Start presenting a tab. Okay, maybe I can. So I have to turn off my sound. And we listen to this.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever. Living is easy with eyes closed. Misunderstanding all you see. It's getting hard to be someone, but it all works out. It doesn't matter much to me. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever. No one I think is in my tree. I mean it.
Help, I need somebody help, not just anybody help. You know I need someone help. When I was younger, so much younger than today, I never needed anybody's help in any way. But now these days are gone and I'm not so self-assured. Now I find I've changed my mind and opened up the doors. Help me if you can, I'm feeling down, and I do appreciate you being round. Help me get my feet back on the ground. Won't you please, please help me? And now my life has changed in so many ways. My independence seems...
Ladies and gentlemen, whole world, the Beatles!
I've got something to say that might cause you pain. If I got you talking to that boy again, I'm gonna let you down and leave you flat. Oh, you can do that. Second time I caught you talking to him, so I have to down, let you down, leave you flat. Gonna let you down and leave you flat, because I told you before. Oh, you can't do that. Everybody
Okay, what we've got to know is this is the early days of TV, right? So they're playing with the form. You saw in Strawberry Fields, they even using cameras running them backwards. Analog technology before all the tools we can use now to make things go backwards and forwards and so on. They were inventing this stuff, but they sort of, yeah, it all became very commercial and fueled the different techniques and gadgets that we now have all in our pockets and phones. Running music backwards and taking samples of sound from other musicians. And I mean, it's just looking at them, you see that they're playing with the form here. They're playing with the form of a band, but they decided we'll sit down in chairs. Unheard of at the time. You even see them looking sometimes at the camera, like John Lennon there is kind of self-conscious. Ringo standing up, whatever. They play with harmonies. They do some amazing tracks. There's no question about it, though I much prefer the Stones. What I want to do is get into their exoticism, though, right? That they kind of go exotic in the sense of John gets into the Tibetan Book of the Dead and goes all Asian, South Asian on us. Goes to India and meets a guru there, and this appears as material for the commercial stuff they're doing. An example of that will be the video of Tomorrow Never Knows. All right, I want to show you that from here. Okay, I'm going to make it larger, and then to share it. So let's just watch the video first and then talk about it. Sound off, my sound off. Come on, let me do that. Did you get no sound for that? That's not good, because I could hear sound. Yeah. Why not? Unmute your presentation. Doesn't let me. That's annoying. Let me try something else then. Okay, this is the cartoon version. So as I was saying, there's this stop presenting that, presenting a tab. There was a cartoon series every morning. Here it is, but it doesn't have the songs either. Okay, that one's actually a remix. Somebody asked, is it the voice of the Beatles? It's a remix. They've run through the Mission, Japanese group, but it still is Lennon's voice run through a sound. Now, that's interesting that people have been remaking it. I want to show a little bit now, before I start talking in general about it, about the making of this track. Right, this is the period where the Beatles are being very experimental, and here's George Martin introducing John Lennon, talking about making the song.
It was a great innovation.
That's me and my
Tibetan Book of the Dead period. And the expression Tomorrow Never Knows was another of Ringo's. So I gave it a throwaway title because I was a bit self-conscious about the lyrics of Tomorrow Never Knows. So I took one of Ringo's malapropisms, which was like Hard Day's Night, and sort of to take the edge off the heavy philosophical lyrics.
John had this song which was all on the chord of C, which in our minds was okay, like Indian music's all on one chord. It's a perfectly good idea. I was wondering how George Martin was going to take it, because it was a bit of a radical departure, you know. At least we'd had 3 chords and maybe a change for the middle 8 even, you know. Suddenly this was just John just strumming on C rather earnestly, and, you know, lay down your mind existence.
In those days, there was no technology like there is now. I mean, there was 2 guitars, bass and drums, and that was it. If we did stuff in the studio with the aid of recording tricks, then we couldn't just reproduce them on stage. Like nowadays, you could do Tomorrow Never Knows, have all the loops up there on a keyboard, kind of emulator stuff, and you could have as many piano players and drummers and, you know, orchestras, whatever you wanted. But in those days, that's it. We were just a little dance hall band, and we never really thought of augmenting ourselves.
I wish I could have the audio of that underneath what I'm saying. No, it's causing echo. Sorry. I wanted to play that drone after. One thing that McCartney says in the interview we just saw, where he's... where he was talking about McCartney, talking about making it Tomorrow Never Knows. He was saying that John had got this influence from Indian music. He was strumming along in C, and that's okay, he says, because in Indian music, you know, sometimes you just have one note. He's talking about the drone of the tempura or the sitar, which is the bass underlying any raga, any song. You can't exactly call them song, but any playing of those instruments in Indian music. And Lennon and George especially, but all of them eventually had become quite enamored with things Indian. And I want to get into thinking about that, because behind Tomorrow Never Knows, there is that drone as well. All right, let's go back to playing that tab. See if I can't get a better version of Tomorrow Never Knows. Okay. This might have German subtitles, but we'll see. This tab is sharing your screen. Little TV series, that one. Okay. I want my volume off. So in that one, I don't even hear the sound myself. So let's not use that. I'll try something else. Talk and pop, giving you without YouTube. 10 interesting facts about Tomorrow Never Knows. Analysis of Tomorrow Never Knows. 800% slower version of a Tomorrow Never Knows. No. The cartoon episode sequence sing-alongs removed.
A fine shortcut you got us on, Paul. I don't believe you know where we are.
Oh, yes, I do. I'm following Ringo's nose.
Then we're in for a long trip.
Let's rest here a bit. Funny looking place. Aye, there's a well.
Where did he go? Down this hole, I think. It's a well.
Hey, Ringo! Ringo, hey! Yeah.
Hey, Ringo, come back.
Hey, look out!
Oh, where are we?
You're on top of me. Get up.
Hey,
We're upside down. What's happened?
oh, that's better. We must have gotten used to it. But where are we?
We must be at the center of the earth.
The inner world.
But how are we going to get back?
Yeah, let's look around. Come on.
Rum-looking place. Hey, look, I'm inside a statue.
Yeah, Kinky. And look at all those strange-looking people out there. Let's ask them the way out. I say, can you tell us the way out?
They're running away.
Look, they left one behind.
Don't be afraid.
It's talking foreign.
And it's scared.
Only one thing to do. Ready?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they liked it. I wonder what he said.
He said they want us to stay with them.
So the music here has been cut out for copyright reasons, but the fun thing here is that they are doing their exotic thing in the cartoon, but almost any exotic will do. Right?
It's better. Hey, we're back. What happened?
The India exotic can be replaced by a Mexican exotic, and the girl that's there who's speaking foreign, right? Exactly, it's her words are run backwards. They loop the tape. She could be speaking anything. It doesn't matter as long as Aztec, Mexican, or Asian mythology at that point didn't so much matter for the cartoon. But the Beatles were being taken seriously, although with a lot of ignorance about, or not enough knowledge about Buddhism but that was, I mean, the era that they were in, it the 60s were an experiment really in mind expansion. They used they used other cultures as a tool for reflective thought, I suppose, for thinking. Right, I'm trying to share my screen. For thinking that, you know, any alternative to the dominant bourgeois West would be a way of freeing the mind from of the Beatles or any of the other artists. Like famously, Bob Dylan saying, "The times they are a-changing." Right, the 60s was a period of in the West, economic boom, and after a long boom, the so-called baby boomers, right, of this late 50s, 60s era, and the war, they'd had 20 years or 15. And England was, as World War II got. But there was definitely optimistic sense amongst the youth, and they took on some political challenges, like, for example, the civil rights movement. And Bob Dylan was a part of that, the anti-racism, the civil rights movement against black racism in the US, right? And they from the mind was through an interest in India, partly because there were Indians in England. Now that TV show was produced, the cartoon produced by King Features, and there were various actors doing the voices. The animation was done by an Australian company, and they also did that movie Yellow Submarine, which is fantastic, and I'd show that if it was possible. But the thing, it doesn't, Yellow Submarine has its own set of interests. Like what the Yellow Submarine refers to is the war, the arms industry. They live in Liverpool, and in Liverpool they made submarines for the war effort, and the Beatles sang about that. But it was so disguised disguised or kind of buried in the concept of alternative reality that living in the submarine became a metaphor for thinking differently than the bourgeois now. And so did India. Things in India like the sitar and Ravi Shankar, shown here with George Harrison. At first, Ravi Shankar said that, you know, he was amazed that you could get those sounds from a sitar, and he meant that critically. The other picture here is the colourful one is Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones, right? Also doing, maybe you know the song Painted Black, with the drums from the recently deceased Charlie Watts, the great drummer of the Stones, and then the sitar riff, do 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 do, of Painted Black. Similarly, there are sounds pulled out by the Beatles from a sitar that you couldn't necessarily make if you're an Indian trained classical performer, yet it's of interest. Now, the Beatles, first of all, through the music, got interested in India, but partly also because they met some Indian people who were living in Britain. They got a connection through to meditation and transcendental yoga. Now this is a kind of a form of yoga that was marketed by India for sale in the West, really, and especially by the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who's this guy with the Beatles here when they went to visit him in India. And the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi he welcomed them because he knew that it was fantastic publicity for marketing his sales of transcendental meditation and a sort of therapy for the West. And they were really open to that. And you know, this is a huge industry now in California, selling Buddhism, right? Selling meditation, selling yoga. Yoga not like it's originally, right? Yoga as a kind of meditation. Yoga means yoking yourself to God, attachment to God. And there were different paths in the story of the Bhagavad Gita, the holy book of India. Actually, well, the Bhagavad Gita is like a section of a much bigger story called the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is one of the two great mythic stories of India, the other one being the Ramayana, which you probably know more of from Rama, King Rama, and so on. That's also in Theravada Buddhism, the Buddhism you get in Thailand. You see Rama and Ravana and Sita, who is kidnapped. And in Cham culture, you see a little bit Hanuman the monkey and so on. But the Mahabharata is the story of two feuding families. And why am I telling this? Oh yeah, well, so yoga. The Mahabharata is a big story about two feuding families, and within that is a text on what real yoga is. Not that I'm saying real yoga is this, but there's what ancient yoga is. And it's so very different to what they're selling in California or what the Maharishi here was introducing the Beatles to. But they found a way to entice people into buying into this stuff. The Mahabharata, Maha means great, Bharat is another name for India, the great story of India, and the Mahabharata is this story in which two families basically go to war for the whole of these 100,000 verses, the Pandava brothers and the Kaurava brothers. The Kaurava brothers are 100 brothers, all born from one stone. A woman who is pregnant for 20 years gives birth to an iron stone. It rolls down through the building and splits open, and out come 100 fully grown warriors. Must have been a terrible pregnancy. And then the 5 Pandava brothers, Arjuna, Bhima, Bhishma, Duryodhana, 5 brothers that all marry Draupadi, because Arjuna, who's a great archer, goes to a competition, and his prize is to marry the beautiful Draupadi. And he rushes home to tell his mum, he comes through the door, what I've won at the fair. And she says, before she finds out that he's won a wife at the fair, she says, well, that's good, son, you must share with your brothers. And so Draupadi gets 5 husbands. Anyway, within that story is the smaller story of Krishna and Arjuna. Krishna shows Arjuna just before the big battle, when the two sides of the brothers and all of their friends are facing, and the brothers on the Kaurava side are facing their own cousins, the Pandavas. The Pandavas are facing their own teachers, and you know, it's a family thing. And just Arjuna says to Krishna, he won't fight. Why would he fight his cousins? Why would he fight his teacher and so on? And Krishna, who is God, right, who is like a powerful God, shows him that all of this world is illusion, Maya, and that really the only way to escape from this illusion is to attach yourself through yoga, meditation, knowledge, or understanding, or love, to this, to recognize that this is, you know, an illusion. And only if you fulfill your role well in this life will you then be able to transcend and get out of this coil of rebirth and reincarnation and so on. So then Krishna teaches Arjuna 14 different styles of doing yoga, one of which is meditation, jnana yoga, knowledge of the mind. Another one is bhakti yoga, where you just give yourself over in love to Krishna by chanting his name. Bhakti is someone who just loves Krishna, and several others. So then when this yoga gets to California, it becomes a culture industry, and it gets sold as, for an hourly rate. You can hire a guru to teach you, and they have hot yoga and this yoga, sports yoga, all sorts of marketing devices are used to sell this. And this is all on the back of this transcendental meditation, and there's input from the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who got the Beatles to help him advertise his own sales pitch around yoga and mid-60s. That man has just the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Someone wrong? Is that correct? Really? Okay, Indian Guru, Nobel Prize. That would be fantastic if he did. Amazing. Shocking. No. Nothing is coming up. He was nominated. He was nominated for a Nobel Prize. He didn't win it. Yeah. He died in 2008. Yeah, anyway. Yes, he's famous and so on. And George Harrison, who also passed away some time back, invested heavily in transcendental meditation, and lots of other celebrities got into it actually. Music. It became a part of the counterculture and alternative to the mainstream, but it also fed into the commercial music. So they are still doing something different, and yet this is still a commodity. It became the same. In a way, that's true of nearly every countercultural musical or cultural style. We can look at the 1950s alternative literary movement. William Burroughs and Jack Kerouac, they were all going on the road. They're escaping from 9-to-5 jobs. So that whole ideology of mainstream man, which they were into. Instead, they were into jazz, and they're into drug, and they're into amphetamines a lot. They were like, oh. Even then, when they protest, they picked on the colors of the mainstream. A bit ironic that here Allen Ginsberg is wearing an American flag on his head, but he was one of the figures that also became instrumental in translating Beats, and the Beatles took their name in part from that. And the Beats were 50s generation. Say, if your beat get away from that, and then Ginsberg translates this from the 50s into the 60s counterculture movement. I mean, one of his famous 50s poems becomes very famous in the 60s because it expresses everything about alternative. It's called Howl. Howl. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, running through the Negro streets at dawn, crying for an angry fix. And what is that? They broke their backs, dragging Moloch to heaven, filthy Moloch. Moloch means money, building statues to money. So Ginsberg was like articulating the same thing that the Beatles are searching for, and I guess Dylan is saying when the times they are changing. But really, these were cultural manifestations of the real challenge, I guess, that was happening, which was the civil rights movement, right? So here is Martin Luther King in the early 60s being arrested for protesting against racial discrimination, separate drinking taps for blacks in America and so on. His I Have a Dream speech, which was mega famous for articulating the desire for an alternative to capitalism within America. And I Have a Dream, of course, eventually also became an advertising slogan. You know that speech, how it goes. If you haven't listened to the speech, I mean, it's a fantastic example of speechifying. I have a dream that, and he imagines in the future small children, white and black, playing together. So I have a dream. Of course, he was assassinated by the US administration, by the CIA or the FBI or the secret police, who knows what. He was killed. Martin Luther King. Well, you know why he was killed? Not long after coming out against the war in Vietnam, and that's pretty significant. In 1968, Martin Luther King quoted in a speech in the Riverside Church, Bishop Charles Manson Church, Temple or Church of Christ. He spoke against the war in Vietnam. He was probably the highest profile celebrity or figure to speak against that war. There had been, soldiers who'd spoken against the war. There were the hippies that said war is, peace, love, man, war's no good. But Martin Luther King was like a mainstream leader of the Christian church who spoke against the war. Men are not our enemies. If we kill men, with whom shall we live? I don't know, you can tell me if the Vietnamese in that picture is correct or not. But it's like a significant moment. He speaks at the Church of Riverside Church against the Vietnam War, and just a few months later speaks at the Charles Mason Temple, and then that evening, after speaking about the Promised Land, he's killed, shot to death, and that really freaks everyone out. Of course, to the left of him, another figure very famous is Malcolm X, Muslim activist, a follower of Elijah Muhammad. He took the name Malcolm X because it represents African surname that he'll never know because he's born of slaves, right? And he is part of that movement. Now, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were both executed partly because they started to really give some content to the search for alternatives that the Beatles and Bob Dylan and so on had been looking for. I mean, there it was just cultural experimentation, but Martin Luther King wanted unity and between black and white, and Malcolm X wanted the black movement to really rise up. Malcolm King had quoted like the mainstream. He quoted JFK in that speech in the Riverside Church where he spoke against the war in Vietnam. He said, if we make peaceful revolution impossible, we make violent revolution inevitable. and he was on the side of the church, right? So that was almost the last. He was the last sane voice. Not saying that Malcolm X was not sane, but he belonged to a movement that was much scarier for the whites of America, the Black Power movement and the Black Panther Party. Now, that's part of the 60s too. So the 60s was peace, love, and the hippies on one side, the Beatles and Bob Dylan and flower power. But the other side of it was equality and emancipation for blacks. So, like, black men should be able to carry guns like white men can in America. And this is Huey Newton and Bobby Searle from the Black Panther Party for freedom and liberation. Very inspired by Mao Zedong. They carried and handed out copies of the Little Red Book, but they organized in the community as well. They organized alternative breakfasts and so on. I mean, but they called for a guerrilla war in the USA, but there was absolutely relentless pursuit by the state U.S. administration, secret services, and FBI against the Black Panther Party, and they were the other side of the peace, love, and anti-war movement, right? So the anti-war movement had one militant side, and it had a flower power, make love not war side. Here in this photograph, you see this contradiction played out. Right? We can read these. First of all, look, it's mostly men at this protest. There's one, maybe two women in the photograph. But what we see, the burning thing in the middle there, is this guy is burning his draft card. Like, he'd been drafted to go to Vietnam, and in protest outside the Pentagon in October in 1967, before the Tet Offensive and so on, he's burning his draft card and refusing to go. And he would be put in jail or have to flee to Canada, as many did. At the same, the very same message that was in Martin Luther King's banner, right? Somewhat similar message anyway. Many consequences. The hippie opposition to the US war in Vietnam is what defeated Vietnam, because they also defeated America in Vietnam, because I think it was totally the resistance of the Viet Cong, the Vietnamese resistance to America that defeated them. But they also didn't win the propaganda war at home. They started to lose it in the 60s because the times were changed, political ends, and of course there were these protests were screened on. What are what are our children, these teenagers, talking about? Why do they care about Vietnam? What? And this became very much a challenge to the mainstream. And then, of course, media, for example, the massacre in My Lai. This is the president, Lyndon Johnson, listening to the tape, Senpai Captain Charles Robb from Vietnam on the 31st, about My Lai massacre. He's listening to the tape in My Lai, and he's shown in the press, in the paper, unable to cope, and he basically refuses to even run for election next. Although the state, the US state, at protest against the war in Vietnam at Kent State University. The Guard troops shot into a crowd of protesters and 4 students and wounded 9. Massive protests across America against the ongoing war in Vietnam in 67, 68. I mean, they did surveys and wanted to look at the percentage of people who supported the war, and there was very pro-war, 61% in 65. But then as the media showed more and more protests in, say, September 66 or after 69, you see the percentage of people in favor of the war who said no, that, you know, it was not a mistake, was very low. There was a loss of support for the war, and images of the war came home to American screens at dinner time. You know, the 5 o'clock news in Vietnam was timed to appear at the 9 o'clock or even the morning news in America. I mean, since then, of course, America has reinvented the war, right? They kind of look back on it and reinvented even the 60s. So the 60s was now flower power, all that politics stuff has been pushed down, blocked down, forgotten about, and the defeat in Vietnam has been forgotten about, and instead we have Rambo, you know, winning in Vietnam and in Afghanistan and even against the Mexicans in the latest. Apparently there's going to be one more Rambo. Surely he's dead, but you know, how popular culture remembers the war in Vietnam is not how popular culture was watching the war in Vietnam back in 1970, when they were really mistrusting Tricky Dicky Nixon. Nixon bombing in Cambodia, Nixon bombing in Laos, and bombing in Hanoi. Absolute war atrocities that were not supported by the US public media. Of course, you know, it wasn't just a media war. It was a real war, and Vietnam crashed through the Viet Cong crashed through the gates of the Reunification Palace, now it's called, and in 75 and won. But since then, America's never healed this trauma, and no matter how many muscles they put on, it's still really significant. Anyway, the 60s are a battlefield of memory. Right, so it's something that in culture industry texts, and so you really, when you read these texts from the cultural industry, we need to very carefully think about, well, you know, how they represent the two kind of sides of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan and his musical and flower power and yoga and all the lovey-dovey stuff, and then the Black Panther Party, the Malcolm X, the execution of Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and that side, and those two, how they belong together, but in memory of the 1960s, they're often separated, and popular culture has hung on to the happy clappy side more than the political side. If you think of the ending of a TV series like Mad Men, where Don Draper, the advertising exec, has a hallucinogenic trip, and that really gives him the idea for the new Coca-Cola ad. You have all the contradictions of that memory war played there. played out there. Okay. Hmm. I'm not sure if I can say much more about how that worked. The ending of Madman Don Draper getting what he finally wanted. I wonder if we can maybe in the break I'll find the clip of that Don Draper episode, because maybe you've not all seen it. Very big in TV discussion about 5-10 years ago. Not so big now. Anyway, I think we need to have a bit of a break. Running on empty. I'll stop sharing for a sec. I'll stop the video and we can have a chat. We can have questions and discussion. And